My name is Anna Jakopič. I come from Slovenia. Slovenia is part of European Union. I am a trade union organizer, a trade unionist, and a lawyer by profession.
All right. Well, welcome everyone to another episode of Working People, a podcast about the lives, jobs, dreams, and struggles of the working class today. Brought to you in partnership with In These Times magazine and the Real News Network, produced by Jules Taylor, and made possible by the support of listeners like you. Working People is a proud member of the Labor Radio Podcast Network. So if you're hungry for more worker and labor-focused shows like ours, follow the link in the show notes and go check out the other great shows in our network. And of course, please support the work that we are doing here at Working People so we can keep growing and keep bringing y'all more important conversations every week. You can do that by leaving us positive reviews on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can share these episodes on your social media accounts and sharing them with your friends, your family, and your coworkers. And of course, the single best thing that you guys can do to support our work is become a paid monthly subscriber on Patreon for just $5 a month. If you subscribe for $10 a month, you'll also get a print subscription to In These Times magazine mailed to your door every month. But if you subscribe at $5 a month or $10 a month, you'll also get immediate access to all of the great bonus episodes that we have published over the years. We've been publishing some bangers on there of late. So just head on over to patreon.com/workingpeople. That's patreon.com/workingpeople. Become a subscriber, get all of those great bonus episodes, and you'll also be helping support the show and keeping the lights on over here. And thank you so much to everyone who is already a subscriber. My name is Maximilian Alvarez, and I am super, super excited for our episode today. As you guys heard, we've got Anna calling in from Slovenia right now on the other side of the world, and I'm so, so grateful to Anna for making time to chat with me, especially with all of the things that she is doing for her fellow workers there in Slovenia on a day-to-day level. Also, while we're, in the midst of an ongoing horrible war in Ukraine, a cost of living crisis that is squeezing working people across Europe and beyond. But as you guys know, we're also seeing incredible fight from working class folks in the United Kingdom, in France, in Belgium, in Turkey, in Hungary. So workers are organizing, mobilizing, and fighting back. And this is a really, exciting opportunity to hear directly from Anna about what, she and her fellow workers over there in a part of the world that we don't get to hear a lot about from, normally. We get to hear directly from Anna about what the state of the class struggle is over there in Slovenia. So again, Anna, I just wanted to thank you so much for sitting down and chatting with me today. And, before we kind of talk about, some of the bigger questions like, the state of the labor movement in Slovenia, what role the war in Ukraine has played in your, lives and your organizing, I wanted to get to know more about you and your path into the labor movement. So could you tell me a little bit about where you grew up and what it was like, growing up there?
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. It's a really big pleasure to be here today and to talk to you. So, my upbringing was actually started when Slovenia was still part of Yugoslavia. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, also Yugoslavia started to fall apart. So Slovenia and Croatia at that point decided to become their own countries. Which started a big war in Yugoslavia, which you probably heard about. But in Slovenia, we did not have a very lengthy and horrible war. It only took around 10 days, but still, there were big pressures on the workers' movement and working class people, because one of the things was the change of the political system. So we went from socialism to capitalism. And the second thing was that actually we had our markets crash because of the war in Yugoslavia, which meant that a lot of companies went bankrupt or had to change their markets. So that was in the early 90s when the trade movement started to have a renaissance in a way, because there was this big need to blockade the privatization of the companies and breaking of the big companies and letting go of people in masses. Therefore, trade union confederations organized a big strike in '92, and then we had more striking happening in the years that followed. So my mother was like a trade union sympathizer. Therefore, she took us to all these strikes and gatherings of the working people. So this is how my path in the trade union movement started.
Man, I have so many questions. So, because the Berlin Wall fell in November of 1989.
Yeah.
And the 10-day war for Slovenian independence was in 91, as you said.
Yes.
So how do you mind my asking, how old you were when all of that was happening?
I was, when the Berlin Wall fell, I was 6 years old. And then I was then 8 years old when Yugoslavia fell apart.
Wow. So we're pretty similar in age. I was born in 1986. And so I kind of remember seeing stuff on TV in the early 90s. But, as a little kid, a lot of that, I couldn't really process what I was seeing. But I was just wondering, do you have any memories of kind of growing up in the former Yugoslavia? Are there parts of that experience that you still remember now, years later?
So it's really hard to say. I do have some memories, but a lot of things were said to me later on. And then it's a question how much you remember and how much you think you remember, but were actually told about.
Yeah.
But I do remember the war because we had to shelter once. And I do remember that having a big impact on me, although it was just a false alarm. So actually there were no planes coming, dropping bombs, but that was the situation that we didn't know what will happen. So we all had to go to the shelter, and it had a big impact on people's lives since later on, a lot of people had family in the war, so in the other countries of the ex-Yugoslavia. For example, my mother comes from Croatia. So there was a big war in Croatia, although my mother comes from a part where there was no war, no direct war. So, but also my family is mixed. So we had people that we knew that were directly in the war and lost their lives. So that impacted greatly on us. And we also had a mass refugee crisis people coming to Slovenia, and then later on going also to Germany, to Scandinavia, and also to USA. So
wow. And it's like, it's always interesting to think that even when incredible, terrible, massive, like, world events are happening all around us, life still goes on. It's like, even during the middle of war, people fall in love, children grow up. It's like, it's just like, I don't know. It's not like everything is necessarily defined by the war, by the fall of the Soviet Union or the Yugoslavia, or kind of these big economic changes happening across the globe. And I say all that because I wanted to just ask, like, as two kids who grew up in the 90s, like, we still had other stuff that we were doing, as kids. Like, we had friends, I assume, and like, went to school and lived our lives. And I just wanted to sort of ask what it was like for you growing up in that time. Like, what was it like going to school? And did you, with those changes happening to the economy, like going from communism to capitalism, like, did you have a sense of what you wanted to do when you grew up?
So I actually come from a family which is like middle class. My parents both have high education, and they had a steady job all the time. Of course, during the socialism, people had usually had the whole their lives. They had only one job or maybe two jobs, so the jobs were very stable. The paychecks were very stable, and the housing was very stable. People would pay actually 10% of their income, and they would get a flat for a very low rent, which would be like 10% of today's rents, and that would mean that they could live normal lives. Also, the working hours were mostly from 6 to 2, which then enabled people to come home to be with their kids at around 3 o'clock p.m. So families were very much more together than they are today. And also the schooling system and kindergartens in Slovenia are free. So even today, and they were at that time. So these economic pressures were not that high, for my family, and also for the families around, the ones that were from working class. They would get later on, when the markets crashed, they would get renewed, and so in few years, 2 to 3 years, things would stabilize. And the one of the things which was very important for Slovenians was this law which was introduced, that people could buy off their apartments for a price of 10% of the market price. So people would buy their apartments at that time for, I don't know, $15,000, something like that. So and they could take it in a form of loans for 20 years. So people then got a lot of these apartments and as ownership, which even today is one of the big important things why people still live quite a quality life in Slovenia, But the new generations don't have these advantages. So with the coming of capitalism, the crashing of this permanent contracts came. So for us, then later on, we were wondering if when we were going through schools, what jobs we will get, what paychecks we will get, but that was something that was unknown to our parents. So that was definitely different, but still the atmosphere was positive, So schooling, also with university schooling, is free in Slovenia, and there is this system that if you work during your studies, then you don't pay so much taxes. So that's also something that helps a lot of students. But of course, during the 90s and later on, these differences between people in their economic status became bigger and bigger. We used to have a very small differences in comparison to other Western countries. So we were actually leading even the Scandinavian countries, but today we are not at that point anymore. My upbringing, I think it was quite classical. I mean, nothing really special, but because my parents were highly educated, then they also put all of their 3 children through schooling, so we were able to finish faculties. It's interesting that my mother was the first to be highly educated in her family, and my father was the second generation. So my both parents come from miners, mine workers background, like 3 generations back or 2 generations back. So they were working class people, but during socialism, the possibilities to get education were pushed. So a lot of people got education that today wouldn't be able to. So that changed a lot for my family. So so my upbringing was very happy, I have to say.
Well, that's not a bad thing. Yeah, I was going to ask, like, tell me a little bit about it. Like, what would you and your siblings and your friends, like, what did you guys do for fun as kids in Slovenia after the fall of communism?
So it's quite funny to think about it today. Like in the 90s, we played outside a lot. We played still in woods, because I lived in a smaller town near our capital, Ljubljana, where I live today. And we played a lot outside. We played a lot of games where you have to work together. So it was very positive, and how to say, but later on it is funny that when the big shops came, that was the main thing for children, to see these big shops, because in times of socialism we had very small shops. The shops were not big. We didn't have these malls, so when malls came, that was a big thing. And then McDonald's came. I remember it so vividly when I came to Pula, that's in Croatia, where my mother comes from. And my cousin, she said to me, something really big happened, but you have to come, in summer, and I'll show you. And I came, and she took me to McDonald's. So that's so funny today, but at that point, that was the thing, And then when we were in primary school, when we were a little bit older, we would for the weekend or the Friday night, we would go to the cinema, and then to the movie, and then to McDonald's. Yeah, that would be the thing.
Wow. What was your impression of McDonald's when you first tried it?
Yeah, I didn't like it. Nobody liked it. Nobody liked it. But a few months later, everybody ate it.
That's the American way, baby. No one likes it, but you're all gonna fucking eat it.
Yeah. So, and it was quite expensive for us at that time. that's also something which is interesting, because nowadays, of course, it's considered a very cheap food. And at that point, it was quite expensive in comparison to the food which was freshly grown and cooked and prepared in restaurants. Actually, it was more expensive.
Yeah, Jesus. I mean, that that is funny because, you know, it makes me think, as a kid growing up here in America, the heart of empire, and not understanding, you know, I didn't understand a whole lot about, you know, America's place in the world. It was just, we were told from birth, this is the greatest country on earth. Everyone wants to be us. Everyone wants to come here. Everyone wants the kind of society that we have. That's just what we were kind of taught. And I remember when my family and I, my extended family, we took a trip when I was 9 years old to Mexico to visit our family there.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the first time that we had all gone as a big group. And so we went and we visited our family in Guadalajara. And then we visited our family living in Yucatan, over in the south. And it really sticks out in my memory now because we spent a couple days in Cancun.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, everyone goes to Cancun. It's the big vacation spot. And it felt like an extension of the United States. Like we went there,
Okay.
and there were a bunch of restaurants that I recognized, right? They're like these big, gaudy American restaurants, because it was really catering to an American tourist audience, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it was in Mexico, and like at the time as a kid, that just made me feel like, oh wow, like, you know, this is other countries wanting to be like us. But now, much later in life, I look back at that and I just feel so gross about it and sad about it, because now I look at that and I see how all the Mexican people who live and work in Cancun, you know, they're living in like shacks next to these massive hotels, right? Or like they're service workers who are supposed to cater to American or other tourists, but they can't afford to live and eat there as well. And I mean, this is happening all over the globe, right? And like, it's just like, you know, I have such a different perspective on it now, and just kind of thinking about, yeah, the creep of malls and Coke and Pepsi and McDonald's and everything else that is kind of like, you know, crawled its way into the formerly socialist states over time is very, very weird to think about.
Yeah, true. And it is an empire in a sense that it really, you know, has a big impact on everybody. And for example, when we were growing up, we had this constant thinking like, okay, America is good for this, but there are things which are much better here. And we always wanted, like, especially in the 90s, our parents, not us because we were kids, but wanted us to get things that were better, you know. But in the end, yeah, if you look at it, we were taken away things that were much better before, and we got a lot of McDonald's.
Yeah, and you got fucking McDonald's instead.
and as you said, the working class people really suffered a lot during this time, and their rights have been really really how to say, lowered. And as you said, this is something which is still a shock to Slovenian society, when trade unionists, especially the activists as we are called, some of us try to bring the stories of workers, especially in tourism, but also in other like food industry, out in the media, and people are shocked how workers are treated. And mostly these are workers from other countries, migrant workers who don't even speak the language and are really treated very badly. So we took that model from America, or how to say, and we applied it very uncritically. And it's very hard for a trade union movement to stop these practices. We do try,
Yeah.
But yeah,
God bless you for trying.
Yeah, let's say, because sometimes, if there are not more people doing it, you would think I'm crazy. This is just the machine is going to eat you up and spit you out. There's no way that you can stop things. But there are more people who try to stop these practices, so that helps.
Well, I want to talk about that in a second. I want to ask you about your path to the labor movement and the work that you do. But I wanted to just ask one more question kind of about that period when you were growing up. Because I have to imagine that, if you're in a country that is like breaking apart from the former Yugoslavia, that is fighting a war for independence, and there are wars going on, around you in neighboring countries too. Like, do you feel like there was were you raised to have a sense of like Slovenian identity? Like, was there a big sort of like sense of nationalism in that time of saying like, this is what makes us Slovenian and not Yugoslavian or not anything else? Like, does that stick out in your memory as well?
Yeah. I come from a mixed marriage, which was before, of course, Yugoslavian marriage. But so when the Yugoslavia break apart, of course, my mother is Croatian, so she was able to get the papers, no problem. But a lot of people were actually, we say, cancelled, or I don't know which is the right English expression, but they lost their actually ID cards and permits to stay. So there's a big problem in Slovenia still, that a lot of people from ex-Yugoslavia didn't get citizenship, although they would they should. And so a lot of families really had big problems because of it. And of course, being from a marriage, being half Croatian, that had a big impact on me. Like I was treated, but not very much, not very intensely, but still sometimes like something less. Like you said, like I would draw a parallel with treatment of Mexican people in the United States of America. Yeah. So that would be like some second grade people. Yeah. So that would be, and sometimes I would like try to get education, so nobody could do anything to me. My parents would always say to me, when you have education, then you have a better bargaining position. But it's not okay if a child grows up thinking like, I have to get this, so I could possibly be treated the same. So
no, that really does resonate, because my parents told me the exact same thing. They told me that they talked to me and my siblings. They said, you guys have to work twice as hard in school. You gotta but if you work hard, then you can achieve that American dream. But like you're starting farther behind than everyone else was kind of the message, right? So you got to work twice as hard. So that definitely resonates. And, you've already talked a little bit about this kind of in the first half of this conversation. And I want to be clear. I don't want to put you on the spot and ask you to sort of like give me an entire sort of, PhD dissertation on like the economy of Slovenia in the past 30 years. So don't feel pressured there. But
Okay.
I wanted, but you mentioned things like, you know, when you guys were going to school, it was, and your country is literally making this historic shift from socialism to capitalism, and you know, those Western influences and capital are kind of coming into the country and changing the face of the country. So it's kind of unclear in the 90s and even maybe the early 2000s, like what the future of Slovenia and for working people in Slovenia is going to be. So I wanted to ask if you could just say a little bit about like in the 21st century, right? What has you know, the like labor market kind of looked like for a lot of folks in Slovenia, and how did you find your way into the world of organized labor?
So, first of all, during the 90s, like I said in the beginning, a lot of markets crashed. So that was a big crisis, which was used very intensely by the Western economists, especially the Chicago boys that came many times to Slovenia trying to push the narrative of privatization and of letting people go in mass, so that a shock can be made to change the structure of the society economically, but also to cut the ties between people, and this empathy which still existed at that time. For example, if I just say it in a way like it was a mantra that even for richer people, it's much better to live in a society when you don't have people who are starving, you don't have people who are barely making it. You know, that a society where everybody lives a good life or good enough life is something which we all want to have, since it's much better to live in such a world, which is true. But later on, like there is later on, this mantra came that there is a price to be paid if somebody wants to get richer, you know, and of course we have to pay people more if they are more productive. So this mantra of productivity came in, and of course people who were being paid more and more were not the ones who were actually contributing more, but were those who were privatizing companies which were built during socialism. So quite funny thing is, when you look at the Slovenian market, you still have only companies which were built actually in socialism. I was just thinking when preparing mentally to talk to you, like which company was built anew after capitalism came to Slovenia, and I couldn't find any, to be honest. Maybe some little companies, but this would happen in socialism as well. Whereas privatization, like buying of our big companies from the Western companies or states, even like airport was the biggest airport was bought by the German country. Germany itself. So you know, they were built in socialism, and it was a paradox that they were saying, like, you know, socialism was not doing any good companies, but in the end, when you look at it, they're just reselling all the time these companies that were actually built during that period. So that had big impact on people when these companies were sold, because usually they would be sold in pieces, or parts that were very lucrative were sold, and the other parts would stay, and people's paychecks would lower, their rights would lower, and of course trade unions had a big crisis at that time. Trade unions in socialism were actually organized in a way that there was only one trade union confederation in Slovenia, and so at that time they were quite intensely connected to the government, that's true. And they would not do a lot of bargaining, but they would do like, they would make workers' lives more stable and take care of extra things, For example, I don't know, they would build summer houses where workers could go for very cheap money. Even today, a lot of companies still own these apartments at the seaside where you can go and pay like a fifth of the normal price that you would pay if you go somewhere private. Then they would take care of financial lending. You would put a little bit of your money aside in it was called B. I don't know how to translate it, but you would put a little bit of money. Every worker would put a little bit of money in this this place, and then when you had problems, nobody would ask you why, but you could take this money for 1 year. For example, now I would have a problem, like my children, I don't know, would need some extra money. I would take $2,000 and then I will give it back in 1 year. And it would be you wouldn't pay any fee on it, and and otherwise I would put like $5 each month to this place. So then I could take the money when I needed it. So that would be something which was very positive. Then trade unions also helped building of apartments, and so that the people would get flats. Or if they wanted, they could get money to build their own houses. So a lot of people did not want to live in flats, but decided to get money to buy material to build the house themselves. So a lot of people actually built houses themselves. This was usually helped by the neighbors. So we still have a lot of houses that were built like that in Slovenia. So the labor union then movement had to change in the 90s to go to the defense, offense, to start negotiating and strike actions and so on, and to protect the rights of the working people, which were under attack en masse. So then, like I said in the beginning, in the 90s, we had this general strike action in Slovenia, but also later we had big gatherings of workers, and that would always push a little this lowering of the rights a little bit back. So also we had a very big it wasn't a strike, it was actually like a gathering of workers in 2011 that we stopped that the pension system would collapse, and that we stopped the possibility that a mini work would be possible. I don't know if you know this mini work system that they have in Germany, where the employers can decide if they take you for a few hours a week, and they pay you only for these few hours a week. They don't have to take you for 40 hours a week, or what is full time. In Slovenia, it's 40 hours a week at the moment, although we have this possibility of 35 hours, which is not very very used, but still the possibility is there. Maybe about this a little bit later.
Yeah.
So,
well, I was just going to say, we got a whole lot of that in the United States, where we've got full-time employees. We have part-time employees who usually work on an hourly basis, maybe, anywhere between 5 and 20, or even people who work 40 hours a week, but are still categorized as part-time employees. We have contractors, people who can be working at a company but are not employed by the company. They're employed by a cleaning service that the company hires to clean its offices, or IT people who they hire to fix their computers. They're the gig workers. There are just so many different layers now in the United States for people to not be full-time employees. It's ridiculous.
So in Slovenia, this situation is also flooding the market, although we still, in theory at least, we have this a must that a worker has to have a permanent job for 40 hours a week, that there are no possibilities for them to be laid off without reason. And the reason has to be legal. So you have to do something wrong, or the company is crashing, and that has to be shown, otherwise you cannot be let go just because, like in America. And we still have this notion that people have to be workers if they actually fulfill the criteria. So you cannot employ people hourly, so 0-hour contracts are not allowed, are illegal. And also these contracts that you said are also illegal in Slovenia, but still happening. So a lot of people still do work civil contracts, although they are actually workers. But then this worker would have to go to to legal procedures, so to court, and ask for a contract, and they would get it. But it takes 2-3 years, sometimes 4 years. So that's a big problem then, for workers. So what I wanted to say is that you asked me also how I came to the trade union movement. That was actually definitely through my mother. She took us to many these protests and strikes. So that would be something that I grew up with. But then also much more, because I actually worked as a volunteer for an organization that protected refugee rights, refugees, and tried to integrate them and help them integrate, because the government is many times making it very hard for refugees to integrate. So then I came across also with the problems that they had on the working market. A lot of them worked illegally, and we were trying to make that legal so that they could be, treated humanely and have all the workers' rights. So then I initiated the idea that we have a project with trade unions and try to help migrant workers and refugees who were working in Slovenia. So this is how I came in contact with trade union movement. That was the time when in Slovenia, because of the crisis of 2008, construction sector collapsed. So a lot of migrant workers from ex-Yugoslavia who worked for construction, big construction companies in Slovenia were treated really, really badly. And that was the first group of workers next to refugees who I tried to organize and help them protect their rights. So, and of course, make their rights better. And so during this project, we started this, how to say, we gave legal advices, but then started organizing people, started to organizing to change the laws in favor of migrant workers, since a lot of the laws were very, very problematic. And this is how I started working in labor union. But at that time, I finished my law faculty. I actually was a volunteer. I work or activist. I actually worked for a university. I was a young researcher and in a lawyer's office. But then they offered me in 2014, they offered me the first contract. So I started working full time for the Trade Union Confederation, the biggest one in Slovenia at that time.
Wow, that's quite an introduction to the movement, right? Like doing that work. And I guess just for folks in North America who are listening to this, I just wanted to kind of ask where, you know, a lot of those migrant workers and refugees were coming from.
So at that point, most of the migrant workers were from ex-Yugoslavia. Bosnia, Serbia, Macedonia. Some of them who came to us were also from Kosovo. And also from Romania, Bulgaria, but less of them. So mostly ex-Yugoslavia countries. And refugees at that point were mainly from Afghanistan. And also from Africa. But the situations were very different between them. So the problems, the struggles that they had were different. So I mostly worked with people from Afghanistan and Syria. Some of them came from Syria. So yeah, that would be most of them. Yeah.
And what kind of work would they find themselves doing if they could find work?
Yeah, so the work. So we then found this possibility that they, if they started schooling, you know, and schooling is free in Slovenia, they would be able to work, you know, although this is not work which would give you all the rights of a worker. So especially pension funds are not respected the same, and sick days leave is not respected the same. So in Slovenia, this pension funds, state pension fund is still very strong. So the pensions, we always say, are very low, but still they are around 68% of the salary that you would get before. And so after 40 years of work, and when you're 60 years old, you get a pension, which is, as I said, around 68% of your former salary, you know. So and the minimum pension is also required, and so. But so for them, that they don't get these rights, but other rights they do get, and so most of them went to schooling. Most of them went actually to primary school because they did not have primary schools. So they had to learn language, which was very hard for them. And of course, all the other subjects. And in the afternoon, they were then able to work. So student work at that time was like catering or working in news printing, like newspapers printing of this big, how do you call it, like where they print the newspapers. So that many of them work still there, and nowadays it's Volt and this kind of I don't know. You have Volt in America. Yeah, I think it's American corporation, no?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we now have actually Volt and Glovo workers organizing and striking in Slovenia because they don't have normal contracts. So they're under the civil law, and most of them actually work like a student work, although in reality it's not a student work. So for refugees, these were the jobs that they would get, and of course restaurant business, like cleaning the dishes, cleaning the fish, things like that were not very popular among workers who have citizenship and are able to get better paid and better working condition jobs. For migrant workers, the construction is very heavily hit. I mean, a lot of people in constructions are actually migrant workers. Then truck drivers. So we also organized the truck drivers, which were treated horribly. We had cases where they would be beaten. So we would go to the media and sensibilize the general public about it. So some steps were made about it, but truck drivers that drive across the whole Europe. So these two sectors were the ones where we helped migrant workers the most. Later on, when I became organizer, a proper organizer, part of the system of Trade Union Confederation. I covered more sectors, and for example, one of the sectors where a lot of migrant workers work in poor conditions is tourism. So it is very similar that you described before. Like, for example, people are brought from Bulgaria, Romania. They don't even speak the language, and then they work on oil pumps, and they live in containers, or they work in hotels but live in containers, or they live in rooms which are not meant for people to live in. So a lot of workers in tourism, especially these big hotel chains, are being treated very badly, are being outsourced to this agency type works. So I also did a lot of organizing of maids in hotels, which were also many of them migrant workers.
Man, you're a badass, Anna. Like that's incredible to hear. And I just wanted to kind of keep asking more about that for people here in North America and beyond. If you could just talk more about, now that you're like you said, a full-time organizer with the Labor Federation, like, what does that organizing look like on a week-to-week basis? Like, what are you doing? What are you talking to workers about? What are you hearing from them? And yeah, just give us more of a sense of that important, vital work that you are doing.
So at the moment later on, then I actually headed to public sector trade unionism in Slovenia. So and even today, I actually organize and cover workers in kindergartens. And still workers also in sectors of food industry. So it's a little bit of a mix of the two worlds, public and private sector. But after I had two kids, I also had problems with my former employer, trade union, since my view of organizing and was a little bit too aggressive, I would say, for some. And a lot of times I would hear like, we agree with you, but it will never work. And then when it did work, that became a big problem for some. So I tried to continue to work the way I feel is the only way to protect workers, and also to work with more people who see working class struggle the same way as I do, and trade unionism and trade union movement as I would like to be seen. So I joined Confederation of Trade Unions 90. So it was established in the year 1990. I work in a group of people who are really great, and we are and try to be activists. So, for example, at the moment, next to having these big negotiations in public sector, we also try to organize a group of workers in our port. We have one port in Slovenia. And there are a lot of workers which are agency workers, or workers which are for which the port pretends that they have given it this work to other companies, and just pays the companies to do what they want to do, whereas the workers are not don't have anything to do with them. So now we are forcing the port to recognize that these are actually their workers. They work for the port, and then they have to be also treated as such. Their paychecks have to be at least doubled, and also all the rights have to be given to them. So we actually in December of last year managed to get a Supreme Court decision that these workers are actually port workers. So tomorrow we have a media coverage again, and we will try to push the port again to acknowledge what the Supreme Court said, because Supreme Court now gave it to lower courts to enforce this decision. But of course, that means that each of the workers has to wait until the courts enforce the decision, which can take 2 to 3 years. So we're trying to push and put pressure on the port, which is actually state-owned. So it's a quite a funny situation. So at the moment, this is something that we are doing in activism part, and of course this classical, or how to say, trade unionism, which I do at the moment. We have really heavy negotiations in public sector, where we're trying to negotiate a new model of paying the workers, and the pushes are very big from the state to lower some rights of the workers, So we have like daily negotiations. It's quite exhausting. Next to that, we negotiate with the state and the business organizations for the new change, not new, but change this, how to say, law, workers' law, So this basic law that we have, because we want to change one thing is that companies are not allowed to take agency work in cases when work is permanent and or is so dangerous that it is not okay for agency to do it. So that is something which is very important for us to change. And the second thing is to protect the trade unionists in the companies and in public sector. So that would mean the shop stewards, that they would be protected in a way that if they are fired, that their employer would have to pay them full until the court decides that the letting go was legal. So these are two things that we are negotiating on Friday. Hopefully we get it. We will
Hell
see.
yeah. Give them hell, baby. Give them hell.
Yeah.
Well, and it's funny because it what you said about kind of bargaining with employers when we're talking about the public sector, it just made me think of what you said also earlier about the role of trade unions under socialism. And because I feel like, socialism gets a bad rap in that regard because obviously, like, there's going to be a tension there. We see this in socialist countries in the past, and even the few existing ones like Cuba today, where there's a tension there when unions or workers in general are sort of going on strike or making like demands against their employer, because if you live supposedly in like a workers' state, then when workers are going on strike, like, what does that mean, right? It means
exactly.
so there's an issue there, which and hell, I don't care if you're a socialist country, like I'm all for that, but it's like I still am always for the workers, and so like that we can't kid ourselves and pretend as if class conflict and exploitation and mistreatment on the job suddenly just disappears under socialism. These things are eternal struggles that need to be eternally fought. But it made me realize when you were talking that in a lot of ways we see that same dynamic in the public sector. I mean, here in the United States, federal workers cannot go on strike. Like we just saw last year, the railroad workers, they're not technically federal employees, but because the labor relations on the railroads are governed by a separate set of laws that the government put in place to essentially prevent them from striking, the government can step in and say, no, you're not allowed to strike, right? Because the supply chain's too important to the economy or whatever. But also, that's the same argument that Ronald Reagan used when he fired all of the air traffic controllers in 1981, because they were technically federal employees and they weren't allowed to strike. So that's why Reagan was able to fire all of them. And so you have that similar sort of tension here where it's like, okay, you're in a union, but you're also part of the state, and the state is supposed to, like, I don't know, represent the interests of working people. So if you're going on strike, there's a problem there. I don't know. It just feels like, I guess what I'm trying to say is like that issue does not exist only for socialist states. It also very much exists in like what we call the public sector across the board, it seems.
True. So you opened two very, very interesting topics for me, which I try to think about many times. So first is striking during socialism. So what was interesting to me is when I came to the trade union movement, I always ask older people, older trade unionists, how did things happen before, because I see a lot of things being lost, some on purpose, and I find it to be a big problem for the labor union that a lot of things, a lot of memories and historical battles that trade unions did were actually lost, like in memory, in records, and so on. So to be direct and to answer your question, there were strikes during socialism, and as you mentioned, it was a big no-no. So it was considered to be like a slap to the face to the government, which was supposed to be workers protecting government. So what does it say about the system? So then people would be pressured not to do it because, of course, that would show a bad image on the country, on the working class people working for themselves, and so on. So usually what happened at that time, Belgrade, so now in Serbia, was the center, like now Brussels or Washington in your country. So the trade unionists would say to me when a strike started, and for example, in part that I worked in called Gorinska, where they have a big steel industry. Yeah, a lot of strikes happened, and this was a very strong industry, so they had a very big bargaining power also, you know. So they would stop work and they would strike, and people would drive in big black cars from Belgrade the same day and come and gave them pay rises just to shut it down. So that would usually happen, you know.
Wow.
So during socialism, there were strikes, but I don't know even how many people today realize that. But when you start the topic, then they say, yes, my grandfather told me about it, how they stopped work, you know, that and that year, you know. So there were strikes, but of course not as many as would be today. And the second topic that you said about public sector negotiations and striking. So, yeah, the problem would be for many public sector workers, they would feel like they're in a position of advantage, you know, and a lot of also workers, their family members who are not part of the public sector would pressure them, you know, that like your rights are more protected, your paychecks are more safe, and so on. Why are you striking? You don't do anything. You just, for example, I was organizing or covering also like tax office workers, you know, for a few years. And, you know, for them, a lot of general public would say, you know, we don't like them anyway. Why would they be striking for better pays, you know? So because I had this alive, or how to say, and these stories to tell how I see trade unionism and fight for working class people. Then when I represented public sector workers, I did not have problems with media coverage. They knew that if I was talking about people being underpaid, people being not treated right, they would believe me, you know, because I would have some credibility. So then it was easier. But this is a big problem for trade unions in public sector, and of course. In theory, strike is much harder, especially, for example, in health, you know, in medical circles, because we have still a public sector of hospitals, you know, are part of the public sector in Slovenia. And so when they strike, people are not very happy, and they're striking against themselves, as you pointed out. So, but funny enough, in Slovenia, public sector workers actually strike more than private sector workers, because the pushes against the private sector workers are much more aggressive. So in public sector, we tend to have a strike a year or two. So, people are used to it. Oh, again, we're striking again. Okay. But in public sector, in some companies, there were no strikes for 20 years. And people just think of it like, oh my God, that's something what happens somewhere else. It does not happen in Slovenia, so. When you look at the Western countries of the European Union, they have strikes all the time. So that helps. See, they have to strike, we have to strike. And
right.
that's why I also want to see what is happening in America, because when you talk to people, it always helps. Like, we're not the odd ones, we're not strange that we want to have better position, better paycheck, better rights, So strike is something which is not totally alien.
Well, I mean, that's really interesting to hear, because I think it tells all of us like why it's important that we look beyond our own borders, right? And like the role that we can all play in building a sort of international working class consciousness. And like you said, the more that we can look to other countries and other strikes and strike waves, or massive worker demonstrations like the farmer strike in India, like the more that we can see that, like you said, it's not like we're the weird ones for demanding better. This is something that working people everywhere need to fight for. And I wanted to kind of like round things out on that note, because I could really talk to you for like 5 more hours, but I know you've got a long week of bargaining ahead of you, so I'll let you go soon. But on that note, I mean, we're talking right now, it's the end of May, 2023, and there's a lot going on around you guys. I mean, there's like I said earlier, there are strikes happening, or worker protests, even if they're not formal strikes, like teachers in Hungary and students in Hungary protesting like new government laws there, or air traffic controllers and airport workers in like Germany and Spain, general strikes in France and Istanbul, workers across the United Kingdom are seeing more strikes now than they've seen in basically our lifetime. So, and at all the while, the war in Ukraine is going on, and people can't afford their gas and electric bills. They can't even afford to put a roof over their heads. Like, a lot is happening. And I just wanted to kind of ask if you could say a little bit about how this is all impacting working people in Slovenia, and what you're seeing from workers in Slovenia in response to things like the cost of living crisis, the strikes across Europe, and the war in Ukraine.
Yes, so striking as a tool of trade union movement is the most important tool that we have. And what has been known in our circles in Slovenia is that when you have a big strike, and I'm talking about like general strike or a general strike in public sector, so on, then this push works very strongly for 5 years, and it still has resonance for around 10 years. So in Slovenia, we have a big problem that we had this big push from the trade unions with strikes and other marches against pensions and, like I said, this mini job reform in 2011. And from then we we had only public sector general strike, but not the whole population going in strike or in protest. So that's a big problem in Slovenia at the moment, that the employers and the state as the employer don't feel this push enough. So these pushes that are happening around us, so we are actually neighbors to Hungary, you know. These things do matter a lot, but more than even this push from Hungary, this French half revolution really helps our case, because our pension fund has to be changed again, and all the changes until now were always for the worse. So one thing that is very important in our push is the argument, like, look at what happened in France, and they only hired the years for 2 years. Sorry, I will have to stop just a second. I get my husband.
No worries.
My child came in. Iški, pojdi ti hočil. Saj se sam se eni strica pogovarjam, bom malo končala. Pojdi ti. 10 minut končam. Sorry.
No worries.
So going back, so this situation in France really helps Slovenian trade unions with argument that what is happening in France, where the changes to the pension fund were pushed aggressively against the will, and agreement with the trade unions had this big impact on the population and strikes. So this is something which is still a little bit alive from the 2011 big strike and protest in Slovenia. So that then together works as a pushback for the pension system to be worsened again for the workers in Slovenia. Of course, war in Ukraine, had a big impact on EU. Of course, the most impact it had on people in Ukraine, which were forced to leave their home. And in many respects, because we were living in ex-Yugoslavia and went through impact of that war, a lot of people really feel how empathetic to the people of Ukraine. So this is one thing. And of course, in EU, Ukrainians have this permanent status until the war is over. So that helps a little bit more for them to get the refugee status and get work permits and so on. There are some Ukrainians who came to Slovenia and stayed, but we don't have a lot of refugees from Ukraine, to be honest. In the beginning, many came, but I think many also went to other countries where that they had family members, probably in the west of Europe. Or they found it easier to find job because they spoke English, and here you have to speak Slovenian and so on. So there are some problems regarding language barrier, definitely. Of course, our markets were hit very intensely by the rise of the gas. We lived from Russian gas, so that was a big hit. And of course, electricity also went through roof. But we had a change of government last year, so now they're 1 year on the government. Before we had a Trump-like government and president of the government. Now we have a classical liberal government, but also one party which is similar to Syriza in Greece, so left wing party, which then stabilizes a little bit our government. So they went very aggressively with the packages to help people with lowering the gas prices and electricity prices. So we had, I think that they said, one of the lowest or the lowest prices in EU. So it was heavily subsidized by the government. So still the prices of the food went through the roof. So I think the food prices rose around almost 30%. So that was a big shock for people. In the 90s, a lot of people had gardens where they would make their own vegetables and grow their own products, whereas today almost nobody has their own possibility to grow their own food. So we are very hit by the market prices of the food, so that's a big problem, and the pushes to the wages were very big. So the inflation hit Slovenia was very high. It was 10%, and the wages did rise, but not to the same level as the inflation. Whereas the prices actually went much higher. But the both sectors got approximately a rise of 8 to 9% of the salaries, so paychecks. So something was done, but of course, real inflation was much higher. So people were hit, and thankfully, a lot of people have their younger people who have loans for their apartments and houses do have a fixed rate. Which is quite low, but for those of us, for example me, who don't have fixed rates, the market loans for the apartments went very high. So that's also a pressure that some people have, but not many. So. But the people who don't have apartments, for those who are actually just renting, the prices of the rents went through the roof. So that's also a big problem. Like the difference between people, those who can afford to buy with loans and those who can live with their parents in big houses, and those who can't, who have to just rent on the market, are becoming bigger and bigger.
Man, and again, it's like you can hear so many echoes of what we're hearing from workers here in the United States, the folks that we've talked to and covered across Europe and even in Latin America, and beyond at the Real News Network. I mean, I hope that it's coming through to folks listening to this that, of course, we all have so many unique circumstances that we're dealing with depending on what country we live in, what generation we're a part of, who our president is, what our labor laws look like. But in many ways, so many of our struggles are the same. And there's so much that we can learn from each other about how to struggle better and about what victory can look like, and about how we can all, as a global working class, stand in solidarity with one another and help one another win those essential struggles for dignity, for a life that can be lived well, right? And with a good health care, a roof over your head, not worrying about how you're going to feed your kids and all of that stuff. And I just wanted to, first of all, just thank you so much for sitting down and talking with me for this long in your third language. I mean, I'm just blown away by how good your English is, but also I know I got to let you go. I just wanted to sort of ask if you had any final thoughts on that note for for working people who are listening to this in North America and beyond, if you had any kind of final thoughts you wanted to share about how connected our struggles are and how important it is for us to show and build international worker solidarity.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It was a really, really big pleasure. And as you pointed out, yes, we have to work together. We have to hear stories of each other, and then we can find also that a lot of stories align, that, like you said, working people in the whole globe have very similar problems and struggles, and also the pushes and how the labor movement is being cut, or their hopes from the employers to stop us are very similar, and that we still have things that we can do, and I think then we are unstoppable, and a lot can be changed in the lives of everyday working people. Where people work together, so much can be done. And for me, like organizing cleaners and workers in hotels made me so much a better trade unionist when I saw what actually meant like working solidarity between workers, and how much power that brings, how much actually us working together can stop the pushes of the owners and those who try to actually lower the rights and the status of people, and especially working people. And I think that stories of victory bring us together and give us hope and power to go to another battle, because unfortunately it is a battle. I was told so many times, you cannot see it that way, but I do. I think it is a battle, and we don't have the same equipment as the other side, but we do have each other, and we have something which is much more positive and much better to live with. When we have a worker solidarity, better world, then everything is possible.
Thank you so much for watching the Real News Network, where we lift up the voices, stories, and struggles that you care about most. And we need your help to keep doing this work, so please tap your screen now, subscribe, and donate to the Real News Network. Solidarity forever.